Have you ever made a mistake? Have you ever been wrong at something? Okay, yes, we all have. Here's the thing. If you're going to be a pro coder, one thing we have to deal with is the fact that we need feedback. We need to work with our teammates to figure out if we're doing stuff right or if we're doing stuff wrong. We need to communicate with people. And so today I want to talk about several different types of feedback and how to give feedback to your teammates, how to give inputs to others, and how to do that other thing that maybe we're not quite as excited about, how to receive feedback from others, how to take inputs so we can better ourselves. Uh, now, one thing before we get going is I do want to remind you to wherever you're watching this, we're broadcasting all kinds of places, is to go ahead and subscribe and like, and click on the, if you're on YouTube, click the bell icon. But if you happen to be catching this on the replay on the podcast, which you can go catch this on all kinds of podcasts, Apple Podcasts, well, Google Podcast is shutting down, but there's other stuff. But there's all kinds of places where you can catch this on the flip side. Um, Now, also, here's a chance if you want to submit a question that we can tackle later on in the show, please visit procoder.io/question and pose it there. We just might answer it. Either if not in this show, we'll hopefully pick it up in another one. So let's talk about that dreaded thing where somebody comes and asks you for feedback and you want to give it to them. You want to help them out. That's kind of the whole point of the thing there is. Uh, so you know, the first simplest, most straightforward type of feedback we have is when somebody comes to us on our team and says, I've put together this pull request, or I've worked on this ticket. I've got a patch ready to go. Could you take a peek at it? Could you take a look at it? And what you'll notice all the banners I have for today's episode is I tried to pick out an emoji to capture the emotion of that. And we're all like, oh, sure, I'd love to give you that. I'd love to share my inputs with you. Well, I want to give you some tips on how to keep it professional. Now, you notice how on the shirt here, which you can go get your own one if you go to store.procoder.io, be professional. We're talking about being a pro coder. This isn't a hobby, this is our career. So let's try to be constructive. And that's the first thing you want to do is when you go in to give somebody feedback, comments on their work, try to think in your mind, how can I keep this professional? This is somebody who I'm going to work with tomorrow, the next day, next week, 6 months, I don't know, 14 years, could be. So when we're going to go look at their content, look at their info, what they've put together, maybe, the most common thing today is doing a GitHub pull request. That is one of the most useful features I've seen on that platform. GitHub isn't just a store your source code website. It embodies the entire source code management process, which includes doing feedback like through pull requests. So somebody can look at it and give inputs. One of the first things that you can do when you're sifting through and you're looking at code, let's just talk about plain old code. Somebody's got a patch that they're altering the system. What you can do is look through the code and ask yourself, are they upholding the standards that we all agreed to? Um, I don't know how much these are kind of reflecting in the lights. I don't need this. Um, what's our style for coding? What's our approach for naming classes, for naming methods, functions, whatever? Where do we put braces? Are we using a formatting plugin on all of our code? Does this one have the standards applied? Do we have the spaces in there? And when I call this is sort of like the simplest form of feedback you can give is there a typo? Did they name a variable you can tell that they meant to call it um, you know, order form, but they left out the R, so it says order form or something like that. Very simple, straightforward. There's no argument here. And so it's fine to go in and make a comment and say, is this supposed to be order form? That's all you have to say. That's all it takes. Because what somebody's looking for is they've been working on this for 3 weeks maybe, and they want you to, they're like, can you look at this and spot anything standing out that needs to be fixed? Can you do that? Is that possible? And so go look for the simple stuff first. I like to walk through the code. It's like, is there something obvious here? And that's the simplest stuff. And just be straightforward. Just be matter of fact. You don't have to carry on. You don't have to make a long-winded spiel about it, but just go ahead and say, should this be order form? And then move on. Go to the next thing. because that's all they need. They just need the point. They're like, oh, it's probably to them. They're going to be thinking, I didn't see that. I didn't realize that. Okay, great. Um, do you have standards? For example, do you put, if we're talking about Java, do you put statics above instance-based variables at the class level? And so did they swap the order? Did they have a static below? Did they put a static field at the bottom? Hopefully it's not that crazy. It's not that wild and reckless, but there's probably not a field way at the bottom. There'll probably be top, but they may have something slightly out of order, because it could be that when they started coding, they picked static and they realized static wasn't the solution. So they went back and they took the static out because they realized this needed to be instance based, but they didn't polish it. They didn't format it and put it where everybody agrees to put static versus instance based variables. So it's something small. So, you look for that kind of thing. So, and that's where, that's not quite as clear cut maybe as when you're talking about, um, misspelled words, but it still is very straightforward, because is this what y'all have agreed to? Now, if your team is very lax on coding standards, then there's a lot more give and take, a lot more suggestibility in there, because maybe you do have an opinion on, perhaps we should put statics ahead of instance variables, but not everybody agrees on it. Well, we can't enforce something that's not an agreed upon standard, so you have to think twice about that. You could ask, in that case, you could phrase your comment saying, instead of saying, well, I think statics go above instance, you can sit there and say, well, in my opinion, I'd prefer it if the statics were above the instance-based variables. And then that's throwing out an opinion. That's where you're putting out an opinion. You're still kind of keeping it matter of fact. It's not, I think we should put static ahead of instance because I listened to a presentation on YouTube and they made a great point. And well, you're almost like pitching somebody else's idea. And your idea may not get as much traction if you try to pull rank like that. So instead, let's seek out and try to say, hey, let's go. I think it would look better if we put the statics ahead of the instance-based variables. And part of the secret is when you start seeing, if you see this kind of input, if you don't have a lot of strong standards on your coding format, and you find yourself putting this sort of suggestion or opinion on a lot of pull requests, it may be time to talk to the team leader and say, hey, could we have a discussion about formatting? And you can go put together a presentation, or just have a round table discussion. Well, whether it's y'all meet in the conference room, or if it's a spread out remote team, you have a Zoom chat or something. And you can bring up the idea and say, I think it would help us if we had a more consistent style guide, if we agreed to it. But if we're going back to the thing about feedback and communicating like that, well, that's one thing. Just go put your opinion out there. Doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be depend on what I call an appeal to authority, where it's like, I think we should do this because so-and-so said that. Well, we all have different opinions on who we put value in. And so we can't make an argument purely based on what other people are suggesting. We need to sit there and decide, does this actually make sense? Does it make sense to me? Because the person you're citing as your authority isn't there to argue on your behalf. You're the one that's going to argue. And so arguments that are based purely upon authority don't last. They don't carry enough weight. Is this practical? Why should we put statics ahead of instance-based variables? This is where you can actually have the discussion on that kind of thing. Then you move into sort of another realm. So we talked about, like, well, this is the standards we've agreed to. This is, where you're veering off of it. We're going to be matter of fact about it. But the next thing you move into is, well, you've introduced somebody has introduced a new function or a new method, whatever. And does that need to be its own function? Does that need to be inlined? Does this warrant expanding some structure above? Like, for example, if this is an abstract class, is this a function need to be in the abstract class, or does it need to be in the interface? Now we're starting to get into architecture and design, and this is where the things just get more complicated and get muddier, and where you're looking at this code and you're trying to decide, you're trying to come up with, is this the best place to put it? When we're adding lines of code to existing functions, it's a little more straightforward as to, well, is this a good idea or not? We can decide, is this making the functionality of this method too complicated? But the minute you start talking about new functions or new methods, now we're getting into sort of a little deeper, murkier area. Does this warrant its own function? Now we need to start to look at another standard that people uphold. It's like, for example, if I'm going to add a new method to a class to do a particular operation for me, it probably needs to not be public unless there's a overriding reason why. We should probably start with it needs to be either private or default visibility, no modifiers. If we're talking about Java, that makes it package private. So it should probably be package private at the least, if not a private method by default. And is this code that I'm looking at, this new function, is it private? Is it either of those? Or did the person just add it as a public? If it's public, you may want to say, I'm not sure if this method needs to be public, because what if you're rolling out a new feature or a patch or something and you have this function, it gets out there, and maybe it turns out that it was wrong and you want to take it out in the next release, or it's going to come out in the next release, but the release after that you realize is your opportunity to take it out. If you released it as a public method and it's in a public class, you can't do that. You can't do it so easily because now you've expanded the surface API of your code. And so the feedback in this situation is, I don't know if that's a good idea unless that analysis is also part of that. So this is where you have to look at it and say, are they adding new functions? Is this a planned expansion of the scope of the API or not? And if it's not, this is the feedback. It's like, maybe this needs to be private. Why is it? If it could be just as simple, it should be private. And they're like, okay, you're right. And they make it private and it all operates fine. It could be that it's not private because this method is being invoked by another class. Are these two different classes that need access to this method? Are they both in the same package? Because if they are, this function can be package private, which is just take out the visibility modifier, at least in Java, and make it package private. But this is the kind of discussion to have. And the whole idea in the comment is to maintain a professional disposition and simply ask the question. Sometimes the feedback is, that's a typo. I think that needs to be corrected. Sometimes the feedback is, I think we need to have a discussion about this. Can we meet on Zoom and talk about it? And then you don't necessarily have to put that in the pull request. If whatever IAM tool that your team uses, or if you're in the same office, you can just walk over their office and say, hey, can we have a discussion about that pull request? Can we have a meeting about it? That's your feedback. Your feedback is, I'm not sure it's right the way it is. Can we have a discussion about it? And the whole time is we're trying to be professional. We're trying to keep a positive attitude. Let's not assume the worst. Let's assume the best. Okay. And that's what I'm talking about. You know, as we move into deeper, there's more back and forth. There's more interaction in the feedback. And you know what? Unless you're an entrepreneur, unless you're a pro coder working for yourself, building an application all by yourself where there's no other developers, well, then feedback doesn't operate the same way in that situation. But in any other situation, whether you're building framework code, applications, what have you, there's more than one person. We need to deal with this kind of feedback. This is the way it works, is we need to be able to communicate professionally, and we need to make the point, why, or, and the other thing is I kept talking about the examples of static versus instance-based variables. Another question is, are they using a static variable that maybe should not be a static variable? There's actually, 101 different little wrinkles to stuff that they could be doing, whether it's the naming of the method or the visibility or where the method's locating. The point is, you're looking at it, you're a professional coder, you have an opinion that is to either go to the pull request and share your opinion in a professional manner, or if the pull request and its commenting features are not conducive to that, is to go communicate with them directly and say, well, I have some opinions about that. Are you willing to have a discussion? Maybe a 20-minute chat about it. And most people are going to say, sure. So let's not talk with a negative disposition, but instead let's just assume the best and let's work it out. We'll pause here. Don is checking in. Good morning, Greg. Well, it's good to see you, Don. I'm glad to see you there. One thing I want to check you, by the way, if you're enjoying the show, smash like, and here, let's share this one.
If you're enjoying the show, Give it a big thumbs up and share it with a friend right now.
Okay, let's move on to the second form of feedback. Now we're still talking about coded feedback, but not everything is going to be for other people. We also need to ask for feedback to our own stuff. And this is the second part. This is the part that's more dreaded. And so I tried to pick an emoji of a shocked face of, oh no, am I getting feedback on my stuff? We need to realize and accept that we can write stuff, we can have the best understanding, the best comprehension that we can have at the time, but we need somebody else to look at it because you end up being too close to it and you can't always see what's wrong with it. It's the reason why when you write books, and I've written plenty of books, it's why you can write it, you can be looking at every word, you still need to send it to an editor and you're going to find out there's all these gaps, all these mistakes that you made. It's right now, my book is out with my editor. He just got through the last chapter of the book, and I went through and looked at all his Delta changes in Google Docs, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's this many mistakes in the book. This is why you want feedback from other people, because you can't see it all. Just, it's something to accept and to realize. So we need to be able to ask for other people to come look at our work. And I really say this sincerely. I love GitHub pull requests. Pull requests are fantastic. It's a great way to it's a great way to grab a change, a branch that you pushed, compare it to the main branch, whatever the accepted baseline is, get the diff report, and then go to 3 or 4 people and say, could you look at this and provide comments? It's a very efficient process. I've worked with different change management systems throughout my entire career. PCMS, ClearCase. I don't think I did RCS, but Subversion. All these tools. They all did different things. They're involved in stuff, but I haven't seen anything with the sort of synergy you get with a GitHub pull request. So it's just so easy. You push your branch. Sometimes you have to squash the commits down or whatever, and say, generate a pull request, and then just go ask somebody. Now you can sit there and invite them, but inside the tool, and they'll get a notification email, but sometimes emails are not the most effective thing. Sometimes you need to just ping somebody on a DM and say, hey, if you've got some time, could you look at the pull request? This is another thing about how to be professional when you're trying to get feedback on your code, is you need to, don't say, hey, I need the feedback by the end of today. That's just a rude request. Okay. And he said, I'd like to get this done. Ideally, the way to try to drive some urgency is, it would be nice to get this into the release coming out. If this is Monday, the release on Friday, if you could look at it, it'd be great. But I understand if that's not possible. So you can try to communicate what your timetable is, or you can sit there and say, this isn't urgent. I'd like it if you could get a chance to look at it, it'd be great. And there's something else we need to recognize when asking for feedback like this. You need to look at what the size of the changes are. For example, it's not hard to ask for feedback if you've changed 2 lines. It's not unreasonable to if you can get somebody to find time to do it, to get a response in the next couple days. But if your change touches 20 files and it's like 2,000 lines of change, you have to give people more time to sift through that, because that's a huge time sink for them. It's what companies have to deal with, that kind of stuff. It's they need everyone, because these people are not only having to give you feedback, they need to do other stuff too. They've got other tasks they're having to tend to, and so you need to give them time. That's part of being a pro coder, is like, well, this touches 20 files. Maybe we can have a couple weeks to check it, and then what you could do is you could actually schedule a meeting to come back with the feedback, like in a couple weeks or something, and you can chat with them. Say, I'd like you to look at it. What kind of timetable? It's a big change. How much time do you think you need? And when should I schedule a meeting for when we get back to that kind of thing? This is kind of the back and forth to do it. Now, there's some other types of feedback I'm going to talk about later in the show, where we start getting into not just code-based feedback, but personal feedback, or professional performance. How you're acting on the job, or how somebody else is. We're going to talk about that later in the show. But first, I wanted to tackle what to me is kind of the easier aspect: the fact that we all need to deal with feedback on our code, on the stuff that we're writing. And this extends to more than just code, because as software, as pro coders, we don't just build apps, we do other things. We build documentation. The stuff I'm working on now is actually slides, and we're leveraging Reveal.js as a toolkit to build slides for instructors. And so this is the kind of, we're dealing with feedback involving that kind of stuff. So not everything is just pure code, and I can just go to something like, well, statics versus instance-based variables. Not everything fits that. There's other stuff like, well, do we have a consistent style on the DAGs? Do we have is there a certain phrasing we want to use on the sentences? Or what are the standards that we have, and what is the stuff that we have room to adjust with? This is where you need to become familiar with what is your team striving to uphold, and where are the spaces, the gaps, the things you can make adjustments on. So these are the kind of things that, so when let me circle back. So when we're asking for feedback on our own work, I talked about how to, great. We'll use pull requests. I've put it out there. I've asked for the people to come and give me the feedback. Now, how do I accept the feedback? Because this is another critical skill. You've asked somebody to give you feedback, and now that they have, and it's time for you to process it, you need to go in, and this is what it means to be a pro coder, is you need to go in with a positive attitude. You need to go in and assume the best of intentions, because sometimes some of the feedback may come across as not appreciative or something. You could see a comment that says, I think this query is wrong. Well, I hate hearing that I did something wrong. It doesn't put me in the best of moods. But we need to assume, hey, this is my teammate. They're trying to offer me constructive criticism. Let me move past the emotional reaction and just try to take that in. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe I was wrong at that. Let's not assume that they're, I don't know, calling me mean names. Okay. It's not quite that, but if we fret too much about what the person is saying to us, it can get in the way of us actually accepting the feedback. And we need to accept that not all of us are the best at communicating. Something I had to spend years learning when I was a junior developer was how to communicate with people. I had a propensity to interrupt people. When somebody would give me feedback, I'd cut them off in responding or defending myself, instead of, let me just listen to the feedback and let me try to process it. So, it's my buddy Deshaun. What's up, Deshaun? This is the topic that I needed to hear today. Well, I'm glad to hear that. There's a little golden trick that you can use, and it works. It works in all kinds of places, not just here, but especially the pro coder thing. Being a pro coder, when you're receiving feedback, when somebody says something to you, whether it's critical, non-critical, it's almost like it doesn't matter what they're saying to you. Try this out. Listen to what they said, see if you can repeat the comment back to them. And that is, I'm restating what you just told me, just to make sure I understand your comment. It doesn't mean I agree with the feedback. It doesn't mean you're right and I'm wrong. I'm just trying to understand your point. So I'm not repeating it to be snarky or snooty or to put a sarcastic spin on it. I'm repeating it so that you understand that I understand what you said. Are you following me there? When somebody says something like the form's wrong, or this function carved, this new function that you've added, I don't think this is the right thing to do. I think it should be inlined. I think it should not be a separate function. And I think that was a wrong move to make. What I can say to that is, okay, so what you're saying to me is that you think it would be better if we didn't expand the Surface API. You think it would be better if we put that inline in the current function. Is that what you're saying? Notice I tried to say it without putting any snark or spin or judgmental tones on. I'm just trying to make sure I understand your point. Okay, is this what you're saying to me? And what's really neat about that, it verifies you're getting the message. It verifies you're getting the feedback, and it's very disarming. what do I mean by that? What I mean is that when somebody is giving you feedback, and if it's critiquing, if it's a correction like that, they may be worried that you're going to take it harshly. Now, different people have different personalities. Some people have no hesitation to give you the most critical feedback you've ever heard, but other people, they feel like they're tiptoeing out, or they're walking out on thin ice, and they're like, well, they have a strong opinion on something, and they may be thinking in their mind, they may be nervous to share this feedback, and if all you're doing is you're repeating back, it's it says, I'm listening to you. I'm trying to capture what you're saying, and I'm trying to understand it. And that puts a lot of people at ease. It's a very conducive thing to be a pro coder, to communicate that way. And here's the thing, this tactic works in all kinds of places. So, it's something, if you're talking with somebody over dinner about a topic and somebody says something, you're not sure how to react, or you have a strong opinion on it, but you're trying to bite your tongue and not jump down somebody's throat. Just repeat back what they said without making it a judgment or trying to imply what your opinion is. Just repeat it back to them. Are you saying that such and such and such is, is this what you're saying? And when you do that, it's like, yeah, that's, you got it. Or no, what I'm actually thinking about was this, and it may actually foster the conversation. And this kind of feedback, this kind of a response to somebody else's feedback, this kind of I'm going to repeat it back to you such that I can understand it, really facilitates the next two bullets we're going to get into. Because feedback on our code, on our worker material, on what we're doing is not the only thing that people need feedback from. There's also what I would call personal feedback. I try to think about this is a pro coder environment, so you would think about this as professional feedback. When I say the words professional feedback, I try to think about commenting about how somebody's performing a role. But I would want to think about just the this is where, I was in this other, and this is what you're thinking, not what you're saying. I'm not talking about what we're saying yet, but the situation is that when I was in a meeting last week, and the way somebody was asking me questions, it was rather pointed. I felt like they were questioning everything that I said, and they really weren't. I didn't feel that I was heard, that I was listened to. And so you want to deal with that, because you don't want to go to the next meeting with that particular person and then have them repeat that in that same sense. It's like, if you feel like if you've, and presumably this is in more than one meeting, if you've been in several meetings, perhaps with a particular person, and they seem to always have this sort of sharp tone questioning style, where it feels like you're not getting whatever you're putting out there, seems to be getting slammed, and it's not, it can be a subtle nature. They're not sitting there saying this idea is terrible, but they may be, the way they ask these sharp tone questions. I get a feeling you've probably run into this perhaps once or twice in your career, so you know what I'm talking about. And the point is I would like to communicate with this person and share that I don't appreciate that, or that puts me off. It makes me scared to put up something the next time when I'm looking for feedback, if I'm going to have this come back to me. And typically there's kind of two paths you can think about going to. One, first of all, the place to not try to deal with that, at least initially, is in the meeting. Because now you're in a meeting with more than just, if it's just you and the person, that's one thing. But I'm saying if there's 3 or more people there, and you're trying to interact with that person in this nature, it now becomes a competition. It's almost sort of a challenge. And so this is not going to help constructively. Instead, it's going to push somebody to be defensive. It's just, I've done this countless times where I can get defensive on stuff when I feel like someone's personally attacking me. And sometimes if I get this kind of pushback, it can feel like a personal attack. Let's be honest here. Okay. So this is why this kind of personal feedback is best done in private. What that means is, in just a one-on-one, there's nobody else here. I'm not trying to pull rank on you in front of other people. I'm just trying to share my reaction to that. So one thing is sometimes you have colleagues and coworkers that you've interacted with that you have developed a rapport, you developed a professional relationship with. And so you're like, hey, could we just chat for 5 minutes, in a video chat, or meet in somebody's cubicle, or go meet in a conference room. So it's, maybe you're in a cubicle and everyone's going to hear it. So instead, a better place would be, hey, can we go to a conference room? And I just want to share this because that also could be sort of a neutral place to meet at and be like, hey, I feel that, that the last few meetings, you sort of have this tone and this is how it comes across to me. Don't tell the person, hey, this is what you're doing, because that again is a challenge. And said, hey, when you ask me these kind of questions, it feels as if you're saying my stuff is no good. And just kind of lay it there. Instead of pushing it onto somebody, just sort of lay it down. That's what it means. Try to state, hey, this is how it feels to me. And this is the kind of thing where if you've interacted with somebody a lot, it becomes easier to be able to put that out there and say, well, this is kind of my reaction to that. And the person may say, oh, I didn't realize that. It gives them a chance to process that, to ingest that. And they're like, I didn't realize that. And they may say, hey, I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to do that. I just had a really, the area that you're working in is something I worked in for 2 years. I'm very passionate about that. Or a feedback that I get is I can jump into being matter of fact. And sometimes I can be very to the point, that sometimes some people I communicate with need the point delivered a little softer, like not just go. So this is what's tricky about being a pro coder. We can go read books about how to polish code and how to write if-then statements, and computer logic can be very straightforward, but people logic's another thing. And that's the thing. If you're gonna be a pro coder, you work with people, right? And so this is where we're getting to the arena of people skills. And this is one of the things that it takes years to develop. And it's hard to develop your people skills if nobody brings you feedback. So it's valuable to bring feedback to somebody else if you feel that it's pushing back on you in a sense. So, like I said, that's one of the paths is, can I meet with you privately? So the whole thing is, this isn't a show. And some people are open to that. Some people, you can make positive changes with that. Some people it may be more challenging. So another alternative is to chat with your immediate manager and say, this is a challenge that I have, or I'm struggling with this, and have a private meeting with your direct manager or potentially your task leader. I need to go to somebody and share the feedback. I need to be able to express myself, and you can ask for assistance in taking the feedback. Now, I've worked at shops where they were very good at saying, we support bringing feedback like that to different people, and they will absolutely uphold, do you want, we're happy to keep that anonymous, to not share where the feedback came, but take it back to the person. Or you can say, I'm fine with it if he knows, but typically if you're going to your manager to share the feedback, it's probably because you're nervous about taking the feedback directly to the person. And that can be a real situation. That makes sense. And so, it's okay to take that kind of feedback to your manager and say, would you be able to deliver this, and I don't want them to know it came from me. And, and I can understand if it makes you nervous to do that. The first time that you do that, you're probably sweating through your teeth, and that's okay. Now, before we get to the last point, which I've got a key story to share with you about point number 4. But so far, we've talked about how to give feedback to other people's work and how to receive feedback, how to ask for feedback from others on our work. And we've talked about how to give feedback, what I call more of a personal type or people feedback, to other people. But before we get to the final thing, thank you, StreamYard, for doing that. I do want to share that today's episode of the Pro Coder Show is brought to you by 12 Rules for Pro Coders. And the stuff I'm actually talking about right now is part of this book. And like I said earlier, it's very close to being done. I'm planning to have it out by the end of the month. If you go to 12rules.io, you can pre-order a copy now while it's massively on sale. You can pre-order the ebook. You can pre-order. There's going to be an audiobook version recorded by yours truly and a video version. And there's still time. There's a chance you can, it's a little upgrade option if you're interested, but you can be in the book. You can be part of the dedication and put your name in it. So go to 12rules.io and check it out, because the whole thing is coding, being a pro coder is more than just coding and algorithms and if-then clauses and stuff like that. There's a whole nother set of skills that frankly no university or bootcamp program has time to cover. They just come here and try to grab this because I want to help you get actionable advice to accelerate your career. Now, the last bit of feedback we need to get, and I hope maybe you predicted this was coming, is that if we're going to get personal feedback to others, personal feedback is going to come to us. We're going to receive stuff. Now, I put on here getting personal feedback from your manager, and I put the sad or the frowny face emoji on here because let's face it, none of us wants to hear that. If I spent the next 20 years of my career and nobody came to me with negative feedback, I would not be disappointed. It's easy to say, well, no, I want to get the feedback. It helps me improve. It's easy to say that, but let's face it, that's not our gut reaction to that. And I put on here manager because many times this feedback can come from your manager. It's possible, like I said, that somebody can come up to us directly in a private chat and say, hey, I'd like to share this feedback. In this meeting, you were a bit gruff. And then, the first thing is, like I said, it's very easy to hear these words and feel challenged. It's very easy to hear these words come at you and feel like I'm being attacked. No way is that is not true. Is that not a gut reaction? Go back to what I talked to earlier. Go back to that tip I gave, that golden nugget, and say, I'm just going to repeat what I heard. Let me repeat the feedback and see if I got that. Let's say, okay, what you're saying to me is that in that meeting, my questions were a little sharp toned and they kind of felt critical. Is that what you're saying? I want to understand what you're saying. And not only does that kind of bring the temperature of that meeting, of that confrontation, it brings it from a confrontation, it brings the temperature down. So it's not a confrontation. It now is just, it brings it from a confrontation to a discussion. It kind of disarms the situation. It's fantastic. Use that technique. Not only does it bring the temperature of the meeting down, it's giving you time to think and process, because let's face it, the first 30 seconds after hearing negative feedback, you're going to be upset. Let's be honest. You're going to be upset about it in some form or fashion. It gives you time to process that, because we all need time to process stuff. Okay. The bigger the feedback is, maybe the more time we need to process, but somebody brings you feedback, just repeat it back, not with judgment, not with sarcasm. Oh, so you're saying that when I was talking to you, you thought my questions were too sharp toned. Don't do that. So there's like, well, so this is what you're saying when you're giving the presentation, my questions came across as a little tight-lipped there. Is that what you're saying? Do you hear the difference? That's the chance to listen and find out, maybe I was doing that. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's the case. And, just sometimes acknowledgement of it is a huge thing, because it's like, it's a chance for you to think, maybe there's something to that. Maybe there's something for reals in there. And it's good to stop there and say, after you've repeated the thing back, after you've restated the point to try to comprehend it, it's also okay to say, I didn't realize that. Let me think about it for a second. You don't have to have all the answers right away. If anything, when you're a pro coder, Nobody's asking you to think on your feet. The most intense times are I've been up and given presentations to customers. One time I had to give a slide presentation in front of the Air Force, and it was a room with 50 officers, all the way up to 06 level officers. And it was in that situation I got asked questions, and man, I was sweating like crazy. I was super junior back then. It was like back in 2000. And so, and I realized the I just got a text message. And I realized even in this room where the customer is asking me questions, it's like I could stop and say, well, I don't know the answer to that. I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. We don't have to have all the answers at all the time. So it's okay to sit there and say, I hadn't thought about that. Let me think about that. And you can either respond right then and there, or you can sit there and say, you know, would you mind giving me some time to think about that? And maybe we can chat again later today or tomorrow morning. The indication that you're actually listening and thinking about it is a lot of times 90% of what the other person's wanting to know is just, am I being heard? That's what they're thinking. Is this person hearing me? Because then if you're thinking about it, that's the most likelihood that maybe your behavior is going to change. Um, Something else I had learned, because my wife is actually used to work for Disney, is one of the first things they learn in customer service at the Disney company is to, if a guest comes to you with a criticism and whatnot, the first thing you do is you say, well, I'm sorry about that. And then you proceed to try to fix the problem. So one of the first things you can say to somebody is, well, I'm sorry that it came across like that. I'm sorry that I addressed you like that. So let's and then you can proceed to actually process the feedback. Well, I'm sorry that that was like that, but let me, can I think about that, or can I think about that? Maybe we can meet again tomorrow to discuss it further. Um, Now I promised I was going to share with you a scenario that happened to me. I think it was back in 2022. It's basically they had based on who was covering what modules, they basically said, Greg, we need you to come and become the project lead for Spring Data JPA. We need one person whose sole focus is that module. And we need you to dive into that and to manage that. So that meant I was the first line for any new tickets coming in to make sure that it was upholding stuff. It was my job to review the pull request, to make the pull request. And that's when I found out my knowledge of SQL was quite extensive, but my knowledge of Hibernate was quite lacking. So I found the project very hard to get into. I tinkered with it at the edges in my capacities, but I hadn't really worked with it as a project lead. Suffice it to say, somewhere like within the next 9 months, my manager came to me and he was like, we're having issues with the project. The project is not getting the traction that it needs. The metrics that percolate up to upper management are not looking good. Tickets are not getting closed. They're not getting dispositioned properly. And the kind of feedback was like, I mean, that was killer feedback. And the thing is my manager had signaled that they had there's this annual meeting, just about like every company does, where the managers have to get together and evaluate everybody. They're going to hand out merit increases or bonuses or equity or whatnot, what have you, performative stuff. And they have to figure out how much to give to whom. And essentially, I'd come out at the bottom of the stack for the performance on that. And the thing is, because I'd already done that at a previous job, I'd already been the person that did that. I knew what the process was in short order. And so when I heard the feedback, it's like he didn't even have to tell me I'd come out at the bottom. I already knew that's where that was going. And I think they'd handed out like equity grants or something for performative basis. I didn't get any. And I believe they had cut my bonus, the agreed upon bonus performatively had been cut way down. And it wasn't so much I was sad about the money. What I was sad was I had let down my manager. He had to go to the meeting and try to defend me, and he didn't have enough evidence to defend me. he had spoken up apparently at the meeting that he was confident that if he took the feedback to me, we'd be able to turn things around. He had spoken up that much such that I did get some amount of bonus, because apparently I wasn't quite at the bottom. There was some people that had ended up right at the bottom and it got no bonus, and he had sensed that that was going to be the case. So he had actually fought on the principle that if he brought me the feedback, I would turn it around. And that was something I appreciated. And so I was not upset with him. He was trying to bring me the feedback of senior management, and senior management had seen my performance, and it had been abysmal. And that is what I was most upset with is, hey, look at me. I'm this, professional software engineer. I've been in the business for 2 decades. I've been successful, and I was acting like a rookie. I had been insufficient in communication. I had not reached out to our team leader to share where I was struggling, what I needed help with. I had not pulled any of the levers that were clear in front of me that I knew were there. And so, the first thing I had to do in that meeting with my managers, I swallowed my pride and said, okay, I realize I've been sloppy. Let's turn this around. Let's figure out a plan of how to fix this. Because the other thing is, if you're not going to listen to feedback like that, if you're not going to listen to that kind of criticism directly from your manager, you may be out the door. I mean, let's be honest here. So at that point, I realized I was not tracking my tasks every day. It's where I created a Google Doc and started tracking what I was doing every day to try to build the record, the evidence of what I was doing. And I actually shared the document with my manager, and I asked for his feedback. So that works. I asked for his feedback. So I wanted him to see what I was working on. I wanted to build a mountain of evidence of what I was doing. I wanted him to be able to see what I was doing, not to micromanage me, but to instead be able to see the stuff I was working on. And he could say, hey, okay, that's good. We need some more effort over here. And one of the things I found out to start doing when I got stuck in trying to delve into understanding all the nuances of Spring Data JPA, because it's a complex project. It does like 6 different types of queries, the way it manages, and you go different threads. So when I would get, too deep, right, it's like, I'm not sure what to do here. I'm like, I'm going to go to the backlog of tickets. I'm going to start grooming the backlog of tickets, because we also have 10 pages of tickets. So I would go to the 10th page and I would start reading through tickets. I would see tickets that were 11 years old. I would look at this ticket and I would say, okay, this ticket is never going to happen. I know that's not going to happen. I would disposition the ticket, close it, and I would comment on my document I was tracking. And then I'd go on to the next ticket and the next ticket and the next ticket. So for several days, I'd sit there and close out 10 tickets, 20 tickets. After a few weeks, a couple of weeks of that, I would then be refreshed from doing this sort of menial work that I could go back and do the more creative work and chew through more stuff, solve more problems, write more test cases, what have you. And then I would go back every now and then. I would go back, because one thing is if you can build up the record, hey, it looks good to program management if you can sit there and say, look, I closed out 50 tickets. That's something. It's not the end all be all. It's not the whole thing of what you're doing, but it's a key metric to say, okay, I worked on these features, I merged these requests, I closed 5 pages of tickets. After about 9 months of that effort, and I was, I was meeting back with my manager. He was able to come back to me and say, that was fantastic. It had put program management at ease. I had listened to his feedback. I had taken it to heart, as difficult as it was, and I altered my processes so that I could be more accountable. And it wasn't to be more accountable to my man, it was to be more accountable to myself, to deal with that. And our team leader was kind of stunned, and apparently had provided feedback to the manager saying, where did this come from? So I feel that I had put at ease both our team leader and program management. And it's something that, I've always felt embarrassed by, but the whole process is a learnable thing. It's something we all need to grow at. It's something we need to develop. And that's why I'm willing to share it with you. It's written up in 12 rules for pro coders, because it feels like everybody needs to learn this. Everybody needs to know that this is how you operate in a team. It's a critical skill. It's a little hard to swallow, But, anything that's worth it, anything that's of substance is worth doing that. Deshaun says, thanks for sharing, being transparent and vulnerable. Huge value. Sometimes it's hard to know how you're being measured. When they tell you, listen. That is absolutely true, Deshaun. That one of the other things I was doing at the same time that this feedback was coming, I was thinking in my head, man, I've been here long enough. What do I need to do to get promoted? What am I lacking? I started communicating with my manager kind of around the same time frame. So I'm sitting there thinking to me, well, gee, am I suited to get promoted up to the time I was staff engineer, and they call it senior staff or staff 2, whatever. Am I qualified? And I get this feedback of basically you're acting like a rookie, and I'm like, I don't think promotion's happening this year if I'm coming out on bottom. So, part of something else that's in the book is I talk about what does it take to get a promotion or to move up the ladder, if you will. So there's a lot of content in the book that talks about that, because that's an ancillary point. That's adjacent to that, but it's vital. We all need to know how the system operates. So go out and grab that. Go ahead and grab that book, because it is gold in trying to just share with you how the process works. Because how can you improve if you don't even, how can you get promoted and how can you do what the program management is expecting of you if you don't even know what they're looking for? My first promotion was back in 2002. I got promoted from level 2 to level 3. And the first thing they told me right away was, we're expecting you're level 3 engineer. We expect you to do interviews. I wouldn't have known that. There's no way I would have known that, but I listened to them and dived into doing interviews. I interviewed a whole bunch of people. That's why I've got notes in here. In fact, there's a video I put out a week and a half ago about how to interview. There's stuff people don't know, and nobody else seems to want to talk about this on YouTube. So that's why I'm trying to bring it to you. This is what it takes to be a pro coder. By the way, if you're watching this live, you can catch it you can catch the podcast version when it goes out at podcast.procoder.io. But I want to thank you for coming here to do this, to tune in, because I feel like this is one of my most challenging stories to share, but I think it's one of the most valuable lessons that you can possibly learn in how to be a pro coder. And I want you to go out there and be professional.
This episode is over, but your code writing journey continues. Visit procoder.io to find links and resources to help you become a pro coder.